Hey guys, how's it going? Hey, I recognize some of you. Yeah, so what can I say? We've maybe I'll intro myself and common knowledge real quick, and then we'll talk about the kind of work that we've been doing and how NAN has very nicely fitted into our into our workflow with our collaborators. So common knowledge is a worker cooperative. We've been going for about 2 years. Um, we're a collection of researchers, engineers, designers, and political activists and organizers. And we work with community groups, especially non-unfunded community groups or kind of charitably funded groups, to basically address what whatever they're dealing with, specifically around campaigns or with dealing with like large groups of volunteers and things like that. So the work that characterizes their kind of mission is around kind of like big database operations, syncing lots of different tools that are easily accessible to volunteers or part-time staff, and kind of making the best of what they can to kind of basically bring people together and get stuff done. So they're not normally big operations. They don't normally have much funding or particularly long-term, well-trained staff either. And we do what we can to kind of make sure that they're doing the best that they can with the full gamut of digital technologies. And in the course of this work, since where we fit in is that we're startup engineers historically, or researchers. We worked in agencies as well, and we noticed that all these folk had lots of kind of problems to solve, and were doing the best they had, but had very little really awareness of what they could be using to solve these problems. A lot of these issues always ended up with one technical guy who, in their spare time, fiddles around with a bunch of scripts. Maybe we've seen horrible, like really terrifying examples of like Google app scripts with like lost passwords, or a Zapier account that ends up with like half the organization's like budget or something like that, and everything in between. A lot of like kind of hamster wheeling as well. Lots of like manual stuff for that could take days of someone's time for things that could take a couple of minutes with a well-designed little pipeline or workflow. So we stepped into that. We've been looking at products, but we've also been basically trying to help them wire up their organizational processes. And we've learned a lot through it. So I'll quickly share my screen because it's boring to see my face. I'll just share my whole screen. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, so it's a bit about us and some of the people we worked at, if you want to have a look afterwards. And what we were doing recently was looking at specifically the issue of automations and pipelines. And because through that, we ended up finding NAN. We've looked at loads of different pipeline tools, very kind of high tech, kind of engineer-oriented ones like Stackstorm or whatever it's called. Zapier comes to mind. But we ended up landing on NAN for a couple of specific reasons that we put into a blog, and the NAN team have very kindly reposted to their own blog. The things that really drew us were it doesn't cost much. It's always competitive compared to Zapier, but more importantly, you can build your own stuff on top of it fairly easily, and it's still quite usable. Crucially, you can kind of host your own kind of version of it, and that was a really important thing for us while we were dealing with quite a security conscious group called United Voices of the World, which is a labour union in London. It deals with with workers who work in the kind of care or cleaning sector. They often work in like big newspapers and stuff like that, or in one case the Royal Parks, and they were dealing with like a particularly kind of security conscious project that required them to think about how their data was being piped around the internet. So we suggested that they set up an NAN instance. This is the first time we were able to suggest anything like this, because of course you can't run your own Zapier, you can't easily kind of onboard people onto a lot of the other technical tools for this kind of job that you can self-host. And I can't show you the pipelines that they've run, but basically we found that when we showed people a screenshot of like, or a kind of screen share of like a workflow, and kind of like walked them through it, we could even like design stuff with them the idea of like kind of just having stuff in a diagram kind of workflow kind of clicked in people's minds that like this was, oh yeah, this is like a thing that I can see how this works, compared to what they previously had, which was, as I said, some guy who every once in a while from 4 time zones away might update a Google Sheet or the script that corresponds to it. So that's been really helpful to us. And even though we've not had integrations up until recently for other tools that activists use, like Action Network or Nation Builder, these kind of CRM tools, the HTTP request nodes, and we've also built our own custom nodes, have been really, really helpful. One thing we noticed with Zapier is that you really have to have a certain kind of threshold of kind of, you know, relevance to kind of the wider world to kind of have your tools integrate with a tool like this. Whereas we've been able to take quite a niche, relatively niche kind of problem area and develop a few best practices or a few kind of like common like nodes for those kind of for the tools that work in that ecosystem. And we've begun to get people together who are also enthusiastic about it, so that they can set up these systems for their own. So a couple of unions are trialing it at the moment. A couple of political organisations in the UK are trialing it, and we've been able to, in the process, move away from some of the more like custom tech that we would otherwise have to use, and basically take some off-the-shelf stuff like a Airtable, for example, and just use some like simple end scripts to kind of almost like mimic what we would otherwise be probably building as a silly Heroku app or something with like with some endpoints. And that's been really exciting. In the process, like it's kind of helped us think about the rest of the open source stack. So we're kind of putting together a little wiki of like all these different options you can pick for different kinds of systems. So things like help desk systems or forums or leaks and stuff. And we're particularly looking at stuff that has like a good, clean API interface that we could then articulate through n8n. And being able to kind of say that the integrations part of that whole kind of, you know, stack is also part of the open source system. You could do the same thing as you do with all these other things, run out on your own, you know, VPS, have some governance around it, some rules, has been a real kind of like revolution for us. That's really cool. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe I can stop. I can talk more into particular details, but that's a tiny bit about common knowledge for co-op. We're really into open source. The fact that it's a kind of code-free, free code tool is awesome for us. It means that we have a bit of confidence in pointing the kind of progressive community to this. Progressive activist community to this kind of tool, because there's no fear that it's going to disappear, or that all their hard work is going to suddenly not be possible to kind of extend. So yeah, I mean, thank you to the team for building a great platform, and for being very, very accessible and very, very friendly.